GUI testing with Squis. Grazie.
Thanks. Yeah, good morning. Yeah, I'm Harri Porten and I'm working at Frog Logic. And I will talk about the topic of testing cute GUIs in an automated fashion. And I will mostly do practical demos, so I'll also sit down. And I will not bore you with marketing slides. Rather show you some technical insight on the topic of testing that will hopefully give you some profit in terms of what you can do for your own products. But a little bit of information about me. I entered the Qt world when I joined the KDE project somewhere in the 90s. I worked on the internet dialer. You still remember PPP was used back then. I implemented the JavaScript engine that was used in the KDE web browser Conqueror and later also Apple's Safari. And that's how I joined the Qt makers Trolltech back then in 2000. I worked there for a few years and later founded my own company with a colleague from back then. And we have since been concentrating on the topic of software quality. And we have been specializing on Qt. Yeah, we are headquartered in Hamburg, but we are selling our products worldwide. And now we're starting with the main topic, the automated UI testing. The idea is that you will automate whatever human users will do to verify that your software works correctly. That's of course sounding very bad, but I'll admit it's not as easy to do as it sounds initially, because a tool automating your application will face a lot of problems that the human brain can do quite well, but if you want to do that with a tool, you really have to think twice which approaches to take. And I will be talking about those approaches to show you how you get most out of your automation. You won't be necessarily able to automate all of your tests, but it makes sense to cover the boring parts at least, get your results faster, run your tests on a lot of platforms in parallel, maybe with different languages, different operating systems, and therefore get a lot out of the part that you automated. Yeah, so we started with Qt about 11 years ago, but meanwhile we're also supporting native Windows applications, Android, iOS, web testing, .NET, web testing of course, Java, but I'll of course talk about Qt only today, which is also what we love most. And I will do so by showing you how record and replay works. That's a common technique to start with automation, and but that is just as a starting point. I will then show you how you can make use of scripting languages when you automate your tests. And we support 5 of them: Python, JavaScript, Perl, Tcl, and Ruby. Okay, but let me show you this now live in action. Okay, I hope you can hear me still. I will use this Eclipse-based IDE to show you how I start with a simple test from record and replay and will extend that to a more sophisticated one. So here's a test suite, which is a collection of test cases, and at this point I'm asked which toolkit will my application be using. I'll select Qt, but also mixes are possible, so maybe some native Windows parts, or maybe your application has a web control embedded. These combinations are possible. Now the languages, you can choose whatever you prefer. Maybe you have some third-party modules already, and this is an advice I'll give you. If you look at any tool out there, check whether it's a vendor-specific language or whether it's open in the sense that you can also use some other functionality that is not provided by the vendor. So in this case, there are a lot of modules for those languages that are doing SOAP request, hardware request, whatever you like. I'll use JavaScript, and I'm now asked which application I want to test. It's called AUT, or often coined that name. And I will use the simple application that I wrote last year, which converts units. I'll show you how it works. So that's a simple QWidget-based application, and I can enter some value, choose a unit to convert from and a unit to convert to, and I now perform that operation and the result is shown here. Let's verify whether this converter works correctly. So as I said, I will start with a test case that is recorded. So I'm pressing this record button, the application is showing up, and everything I do will be noticed. So there will be a lot of queue events flowing through the application. The tool is looking at all of those and will try to make some sense out of that. For example, I will convert 100 centimeters into meters. And I press the convert button and the result is 1. But so far we have just recorded. You see here the clicks that I made and the text input, but we haven't verified that the expected result is there. And for that purpose, I can insert a verification point. I can check individual properties, I can check screenshots, I can compare whole tables. But I'm just interested in this value 1 here. I wouldn't do a screenshot here, but if you're doing some drawings or if you're creating a device which has a specific layout, you may also want to take a screenshot, but I'm saying don't use this too much as it will change if your hardware changes or the style changes. So check as much as possible through just the values that you're expecting to be there. So I'm choosing to insert a property verification, and the IDE now offers me a view into the whole object tree. So here we have QWidgets. For the QML case, that would be QML elements. If there would be a web view inside, it will show the HTML elements. I could go through those and find the right one, and on the right-hand side you see all the properties available for testing. In a small application like that, it's easy to search through the tree, but in a big one that's almost hopeless. So there's a shortcut through this pick tool, and this pick tool allows me to select the element of interest. In this case here, it's the output value. I'm selecting that one, and the available properties are there. Don't check too many, we'll just look at the value 1 being shown. Whether this is a big or small font doesn't matter in our case. If the font size is critical for the operation of your application, you might want to check that as well. But here we are just checking the logic of the application. We could do more of those checks, but I'll stick to the single one. I'll insert this as a verification, and I can continue like this. But let's stop. And the tool now compresses all the hundreds of events it has seen to some high-level statements. Starting the application, typing, clicking the mouse. Here is a comparison where we check that the text property of that line edit has the value 1. I'll replay this, and without using my hands this time, it has executed the same steps, and it shows, yeah, the expected value 1 was there. Okay, that was our very first test. That's how typically everyone starts, and it's absolutely okay to start this way. But I want to teach you some best practices. Imagine there's now a second test that is very much the same. But let's say we are converting 2 kilograms to grams now. Press convert. Will I do the same thing again? Yeah, I could. I'll insert, check, look for that value here. Sorry about doing this so quick. This is really just to actually show that we are repeating ourselves here a bit. So I'll check the text property, insert this verification point, quit the application, and we again have a script. Here, closing the window, it's not even needed. Okay, but let's compare those two. Now we can also remove this. They are almost identical. And imagine that your specifications require you to check hundreds of those scenarios. You will have a lot of redundant recording, and if something in your application changes, it's going to become really ugly because you will have to touch all those scripts and fix them. And that's where the same approaches that developers take also come into play for testing. And that is refactoring. Where is there some redundancy in the whole thing? And we see there's always some some place where we enter the value to convert from. There is one place where we say select the unit. There is one where we select the unit to convert to. We'll always check the expected result. And you see, these are functions, and whatever scripting language you use, or whether you use classes and objects, that's really up to you. And I will make use of this now by using those functions. So it's enter from value, and I will move this into the function there. Now select from unit is something we do here. If you notice me doing a typo, please tell me. So that's the from unit. Now I've chosen the meters here. That was the select to unit. And this is making it look very slow right now, and it's not faster than doing the recording that I did. But it will start to pay off. And it will start to pay off on the second, third, or next test. We don't need to do this here. So what does it complain? Oh. And you see that the main test is becoming simpler. It's becoming almost human readable. And that's when it starts to become easier also to extend. But let's first see whether I made a mistake or not. Check expected result. So I made a typo. Okay, so it works. And now, if we would go back to the second test, we could write that in terms of the first one by just using those high-level functions. And there's no knowledge about how a Qt control is recognized, where it's located. This is all becoming much simpler. And this is code that we can share between tests by putting them into a shared script. And now the first and second test can read that in. It's a library that like an include in C++. Sorry, do you see where I'm doing a type here? Actually, I'm not sure where I'm doing a mistake here. It doesn't matter. I'll just leave the original in. Okay. Let's verify that it still works.
You should probably make use of your input parameters value.
Oh, right. Sorry. That, of course, I didn't really use the full power that I was going to demonstrate. That's true. And here as well. Okay, so I could write more tests now by using those functions, but I'll show you in the time that we still have to take this even in a higher level. And this is compressing a lot of testing knowledge now into half an hour. And I will move over to data-driven testing. For that purpose, I will create a test data file, for example, just a tab-separated file, and I will rename the first column as, let's say, input. I will insert a second column called expected, that's the expected result, and I will now redo the same test now using a table. And I will show you what to do about the script to make it work with that table. I can simply use a bit of our extension to Eclipse here. by marking the region that I will run in the loop in the future, not just a single time, but many times. I will select that region and use the option make the code data-driven. And it looks at all the data files it has available. I select the one, and it's proposing to rewrite that function here. And, oh, sorry, I will, forgot to save this. Let me do that again. So I will turn that into data-driven code. And you see there's a simple loop, and in each language it will look a tiny bit different. But I will now use those parameters here, and I have abstracted away the test data from the script logic. Still doing the same as before, but imagine that some department of your company now comes up with a lot of variations, like a customer reports a bug and says, if I enter this value here and another one there and press a button, something goes wrong. You don't have to force every tester to go into the script code. Maybe somebody more skilled with scripting did that part, but somebody else just goes into the table, and this could also be an Excel table, and enters another combination here. For example, 20 centimeters is supposed to be 0.1 meters. Since I tried this before, I think we're running into a problem here, and you'll see what's happening if you look. You saw the input was actually not okay. So I first had entered 100 and then 20, and this didn't work well. And the reason is I'm just typing additional text in here. And if there was some text already, it will just type in more text. And that's something that is also to be considered if you're doing UI testing. Make sure that the initial state of the graphical interface is known. So either remove some settings before starting the application, reset a SQL database, change the UI in a way that is known so that all the elements that you're expecting are there. And for example, if entering text into a field, maybe you have to delete the text that is in there first. You could do so by double-clicking or by pressing Ctrl-X, whatever you like. I will now do this by using another way to change the text, and it's saying, I want this input field to have a certain value, no matter what. And this is actually a connection to the Qt API, and that's what our tool provides. It has script bindings to all of Qt. So whatever the programmer can do, except some template stuff, is available to the tester as well. Let's see whether we have fixed that test. Yeah, we have. And now you see all the work that took me maybe like 10 minutes to pay off, because adding a new row here is really simple and just taking a few seconds. Okay, since we have a bit of time, but you'll also will of course have the chance to answer some questions, I will show you something else that we will release soon and that you will also find in other frameworks, and that is called behavior-driven development or behavior-driven testing. Cucumber is a tool that made this very popular, and this works in a way that you'll describe the behavior of your application before you implement it. And let's say we want to test the conversion of units. And you can test many scenarios, like converting length units. That's the feature we want to test. And the user or everybody can get together, management, developers, testers, customers. They can agree on a simple description, and the description can be when the converter is running. Let's say one typically starts with given. That's just a habit to do. When I enter 100, that was the unit, and I select to convert from meters, and I select to convert to centimeters, or I think I did it the other way around. Then I expect the value 1 to show up. And this is just text. No software understands what this is and knows what to do. But you can turn this into an executable test by creating script implementations for all of those steps. And you see there are some empty ones, and if I would run this, it will always say there was nothing to do. And if you look at the results a bit more deeply, you say this step has not been implemented. But this BDD, and it's really, we see a lot of big companies moving to that type of testing, is a contract between the developers and testers, and developers can work on the code until they make this scenario and others work, and the testers can either manually test this scenario or they will automate that. And I will show you how this can be done with the functions that we already created. There is this first step, given the converter is running, will be a simple call like that. Now let's see whether we can get this shared script loading to work. I really don't know what I'm doing here. Okay, must be recalling a different function. So I will just reuse the functions that we created before to make it easier. So when I enter 100, this is hard-coded. What I can do is to use a placeholder here. So when I enter anything, I will use our ready-made script function enter from value value. And this is how I'm going to continue. Select the unit, but let's do it without a placeholder. Select from unit, centimeters, select 2 unit meters. Actually, I should also press the convert button. I have absolutely forgotten about this. So this is a click button on this Q push button. We'll do this after selecting the 2 unit, and then check expected result. And again, I'll use a placeholder here, and we are writing very generic functions that will allow a lot of reuse. So this scenario worked, and now without knowing a script language, a tester could copy this part and say, what if I convert 200 centimeters to meters? And this will also work out of the box, I hope. Never tried, but it does. And that was really simple, right? But I'll show you an even better shortcut. This BDD support, and the language is called Gherkin that I'm writing here, allows me to redo a certain number of steps by defining a table here. And I can now use this, write this table in a human readable way, and I just have to tell it to not use these hard-coded numbers anymore. Yeah, and this is also a way to define the test. Okay, I'm basically done with those practical parts. I think we can start answering questions if you like. Meanwhile, I'm just listing ways how you would integrate such into your company setup. You can use Jenkins, Visual Studio. You can push the results into Jira, use Bamboo, HP Quality Center, IBM's quality tool. We are not supplying everything. We're just supplying the test tool that takes script files. It outputs the whole results as XML, for example, or Excel. You can talk to a lot of Qt controls. We support QML, Qt Web Kit, Qt Graphics View. You can read out every properties of your application or call slots, watch for signals. And besides what I've done here, which was all done on my Windows laptop, you can do so over a network and drive a test from a single PC on others in your network. That's what we are doing every night with our own tests. You can do the testing on embedded devices as long as you have a network connection. Test on multiple embedded devices at the same time. Launch a browser if you like and do testing in there. iOS the same, either native iOS or Qt on iOS in the simulator or the device. Same with Android in an emulator or a device. And yeah, so more complex test setups are possible. For example, if you're using a continuous integration system like Jenkins that will run all your tests or part of them after every check-in, and that's where the automation comes into play. Yeah, don't have to mention all of those. And that's what I would recommend. Although you might not be able to automate all of your tests, if you have just a few, run them regularly. Don't wait until the release, because shortly before a release and you'll try your tests, suddenly you notice some problem because the software changes or Qt changes and they will stop working. And that's why I would suggest to do that early, even if you just have one test that does what a typical human user would do when using your application. Okay, I'm done and I'm open to questions, so please ask if you have any.
Hi. So if you have custom controls or components, what should you do in order to be able to use the framework to test them?
If you're deriving from some standard Qt class and just overriding some virtual functions to make the widget or QML element look differently or behave differently, there's nothing to do. If you have done something really custom, like deriving from a QML rectangle or a QWidget, then you could expose data from your control through Q properties, slots, and signals, for example.
And that gets picked up automatically.
Right, the spy that I showed where I picked, it will show you. But let's say if you write your own table control, then the tool would not be able to see the cells in there by itself. And then you would need to write an extension in either JavaScript for QML or C++ to teach the tool about the table cells. But that doesn't happen so often. So I think normally custom controls are not to be taken care of. So I would just try to see how well it works and then contact us to see whether it needs to be improved.
I have two questions. The first one is maybe related to the previous, but not related only to Qt. What do you do to the client? Do you instrument the client with some kind of library of code injection, or you intercept the GUI OS events?
We intercept the events, and you don't have to change your application for that. I think Qt on iOS is different because Apple is very strict with regards to security, but on all the other systems you don't have to change your application. We hook into the application when it started, or you can also attach to it later in some cases, so no changes required.
Okay, supposing that I have a client with mixed technologies, so a part of the client is done in Java, a part of the client is done in Qt. Does your product is able to test in a single test the whole application, or?
Generally, yes. There can be mixes of Qt and Windows, Java and web, different .NET technologies, so that's possible. Qt and Java I've not seen in a single client yet, so that would need to be tried out. Maybe something needs to be done. But you can also treat the applications like two different ones. So far I've only shown you how to test one application, but you can also do that start application call twice and call two applications, or like switch back and forth between different context objects. So that's different. That's how hybrid applications are tested.
Thank you.
Any other question?
Hi. I'd like to know if your product is able to measure quality of experience of applications.
So what kind of experience?
Time between steps on operation. In particular, when the application is a front end for a network service, and if your framework can impact the performance, and so if it's a good measure or not.
Yeah.
Sorry, and if it's possible also for mobile application too.
Yeah.
That is very important for us.
Yeah. You see on the right-hand side there are timestamps logged with for everything you do. And you can fetch those timestamps from the result file, which is XML, or you could insert measurement points inside of your script, because not at every sequence point you need to measure performance, but let's say before and after something important. You can track the differences there and write out how long it takes. Second question was about the impact, right? The application will run the tool uses a bit more memory than the original application, so that might impact it a little bit. But of course, it also uses the application faster than a human user would do. So it's hard to say how different it will really be. But if you want to test load on a server, for example, that's a perfect thing to do. Like running your client 10 times to see how well does the server still respond. You can launch, you don't have to do everything from the IDE, by the way. There is a command line tool called Squis Runner, which takes the test and executes that as well. So you can launch it 10 times in parallel. Yeah, third question, the mobile testing. Yeah, you can test Qt on embedded Linux or on iOS or Android, and also native iOS and Android too.
Simulator or on the device?
On the device or simulator emulator. Yeah. Just for iOS, you have to rebuild your application to make it testable, because Apple will not allow it to get onto the device without being signed again.
Do you do it with tethering or Android?
I only know how to set it up through TCP/IP, but USB, for example, there are some instructions how to do that. Another question?
Hi. Suppose I have some test written by using the Qt test framework, so the native Qt one. So is there any way to easily migrate to?
I wouldn't say that our tool is competing with the Qt test library. The Qt test library is there for unit tests, and this is rather complementary to what we are doing. So I would do both, actually. Of course, you can integrate the two, like launching one tool from the other or merging the results at the end. But I wouldn't advise a migration. I would stick to QTestLib when you're testing classes and UI testing tool for the UI.
To automate the GUI by Qt
Yeah, there is. But I can tell you, for example, the Qt company is also using our product for testing their packages. Not for the library itself. That's what the developers do by themselves there through QTestLib. Okay. Other questions?
Altre domande?
Otherwise, we have a table outside. Feel free to come by for a longer talk.
What about internal data like data model, state machine, data that are not visible?
I've indeed shown you only visible parts, but you can also go into the invisible area. Let me see whether I find a good example. So I'm launching the application and I'm looking at it, and let's say we look at the Q combo box here, and you see here the Q standard item model showing up, for example. So you have to start from the UI, but you can go into the model. as long as there is some way from the UI to the back end, you can go in there as well. And if you don't have that way, you could have some Q property in there that you just add for testing, and the tester would be able to read out values that are invisible on the UI level. So that sometimes happens for users. Okay? Yeah, okay. Yeah, thanks also for sticking to me in English. I felt bad about not speaking Italian. As I said, yeah, join us outside if you like. Thanks.